Hi, everybody. Welcome to Pre-Shift Tidbits of Wisdom for Everyday Use. My name is TJ Griffin, and I'm the Corporate Wine Educator for Winebow. We welcome your questions at any point during the webinar, but please use the Q&A rather than the chat bar to submit them. Now, let me introduce your host. Master Sommelier Ron Edwards is the husband of one wife, the father of 5 girls, a surfer, and a lover of all things bow tie. He has almost 30 years of hospitality experience, and since 2018, he has been the Director of Wine Education for Winebow. And now, here to discuss today's topic, Grapes Aren't Weird, We Are, Master Sommelier Ron Edwards.
Hey, TJ.
Hey.
Catch up with you again. So it's just a great thing to be able to chat with everybody this time in their lives. And there's so much turmoil and craziness going on in the world, but for this 15 minutes, we can kind of just focus on what we love, and that's hospitality and prepping ourselves to go back into it, or maybe we're already back into it and getting some tidbits that will help us do a better job as we go along. And, the title is what I feel about this is that, grapes are just grapes. We as drinkers of wine and sellers of wine, we're the ones that are weird. We get hung up on things and we latch on to things that we consider impossible or unlikely, and we let them dominate our thought process. And I'd really like to sort of go through this periodically with grapes, and this will not be the last time we talk about it because there's lots and lots of grapes to talk about. So, there's this issue is really kind of this thing. Is that when you're in the restaurant environment, and this applies to retail as well, there's certainly stuff that's out there that's just no selling required. You can put it on the list and take orders. You walk up to the table and you can say simply things like, what would you like to drink? And these things go out the door. Or you say, which bottle of wine would you like? And they go out the door. Or you don't even walk up to the retail shelf and the wine goes to the register. And these are things that are comfortable to the consumer. They weren't always comfortable. What we forget sometimes is that our modern comfortable sense of wine includes wines that in 1970 in the United States were the oddballs. And the culture has progressed. And the reason it has progressed is more opportunities have been given to them. And they appreciate that. I can give you firsthand experience of thousands of interactions with guests over the years who really appreciated me giving them an opportunity to try something I knew they would like, but they would never taste it on their own because they're nervous. They are spending their hard-earned money and they're out having a good time that night. And they don't want to go back home feeling like, I don't know, that wasn't that great because I should have ordered my favorite wine instead. So these wines offer very little adventure to the customer, but sometimes it's not about adventure. They just want to make sure they're getting a good glass of wine. And these are grapes like Cabernet Sauvignon, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Pinot Grigio, Sauvignon Blanc.
So it sounds like you just listed a typical by-the-glass list.
Yeah, pretty much. And there's a reason why it's the typical by-the-glass list, right? Most restaurants are nervous about putting something on the by-the-glass list that doesn't sell much because they're afraid of waste. Anytime you hit the easy button, there's always a downside. Yes, these wines are easy to sell. They offer your customer no adventure. Your customer doesn't leave with an enriched experience. So if you want your customer to have an enriched experience, you've got to broaden the spectrum a little bit. And part of that is making sure that we are educating ourselves. So because there's all of the things we just mentioned, and then there's everything else. My goodness, there's 800 plus registered grape varietals in Italy alone, 40 plus in Greece, pushing 100 indigenous grape varietals in Portugal. There are dozens of grapes grown in the United States that get very little to any attention. All sorts of these grapes they get sort of relegated to the idea of they're either uncomfortable at best or just plain weird at worst. Even common grapes, to me and most people, like Syrah and Cabernet Franc, which are not exactly weirdos, are not as common as they should be in the mindset of restaurateurs and our consuming public. And that's you sort of like, well, why is that? And I think it starts with us, not with them. It's our job to get interesting things in their hands and then make them comfortable with it.
So how do you introduce these not so well-known grapes to restaurant customers?
Well, I think there's definitely a strategy here, and you definitely need introductions. As we already stated, and it's very real, that the idea is they come in ready to spend their money, but they want to have a good time and they don't want to worry. And so putting them in a place where you're making them comfortable with their decision is always the right thing, whether you're talking about a new dish from the kitchen or a new wine or even something off the spirits or cocktail list. It still boils down to, are they comfortable with what you're saying and what you're offering them? And does it sound like something they would like? And so I really think we can do this. And the most important thing that we can do here is we can build bridges and then walk over them. Okay, we don't build a bridge with our consuming public, with our customers in the restaurants, so that they can walk over it and meet us. That is completely backwards thinking. You build a bridge to where they are, and then you go over it to where they are. And you get into their conversation style, into their descriptions of wine, into the way they think about wine. One of my favorite memories is a woman that used to come into Tapawingo when I worked there. And whenever I asked her what style of wine she wanted for the evening, she would give me a color. Not like red or white, TJ. A color like, I feel sort of forest green tonight. And I had to walk across that bridge and figure out what forest green meant in the world of wine. After a few iterations, I started to pick up on how the color she was expressing was a mood thing for her. And they tried all kinds of stuff, including when she felt light green, I served her Gruner Veltliner, and she loved it. It was perfect. So part of it is building that bridge, being willing to say, we as a restaurant want to serve what we consider to be more interesting wines than the first set we put there, whether you're talking about, an all Italian list, or whether you're saying, yeah, we're an American style bistro, but we're going to offer, Marsanne from California instead of Chardonnay in that glass pour. If you're going to do that, you're going to need to build a contextual bridge and a comfort bridge to your guest. Otherwise, they might order something because they want wine, but they're not going to order it because they're comfortable. The next thing is context. Whenever I was trying to introduce a new grape to somebody, I would also guide them on food. So, for instance, when I was working at a Mediterranean-style restaurant and I had a Sirtico on by the glass from Santorini, and I wanted to get them off Chardonnay, I would bring to the discussion the fact that they're going to have this dish off the menu, which works really well with this wine. And I'll bring it to you in a carafe so that you can taste it first. You don't need to commit. If you don't like it, I'll put the rest back in the bottle. Not a problem. We just want you to be happy. I think you'll love this wine. So I'm coming to where they are. I'm reducing the stress of trying something new by saying there is no consequence other than, I like it, I'll keep it. That's the best consequence ever, right? That's part of building bridges and context. And the next part of it is wine list placement. And we've talked about this previously in our Wine by the Glass program, but here's an example of one of the wine lists I designed along the way. And there's some cues here that make the grapes on this list, which none of the wines sitting here would be the hotbed of attention, right? We've got Syrah from California. We've got Lebanese Sanso Carignan Cabernet Blend from Moussard. We've got a Badenhorst Syrah Mourvèdre Grenache. You've got a Monastrell blend from Spain and Mencia from Spain. None of these were the top wines on our program, but they were there together in a category that began where people were going to start to see things they were familiar with, like Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon, and categorized with a fruit style that looked interesting to them, hopefully. Red wine, blue, blackberries, friendly, and bold. So the idea is that there's substance here that makes the American public happy. With the bold idea, friendly, they can interpret that however they want, but not attacking is what I'm looking for here. The idea that these are maybe softer, friendlier styles of red wine, and that was sort of a context clue to be able to get people into things like Mencia and Monastrell. And this restaurant, by the way, was in Petoskey, Michigan, which has a population of 10,000 and in the upper reaches of what's going on. So it is very possible.
So it looks like you have a slide here, Mencia and Blaufränkisch. These are some examples of lesser known grapes, I'm guessing. And so how would you remove barriers for these and build bridges for folks?
Right. So let's talk about these two grapes. I could have picked any number of hundreds of items, I suppose, being realistic about it. I mean, we could have one of these meetings 800 weeks in a row just to talk about Italy, right? But Mencia is one of those grapes that's been around long enough to have a little bit of a presence in the U.S. market. The Blaufränkisch grape from Austria has always sort of been on the fringe. You know, it always feels like, I hate this phrase, the Somme wine, which makes me feel like, what do you mean? Some guys just like weird wines. I know we do like different wines, but that's because we find them interesting. It's not the only thing we want to sell. So Mencia and Blaufränkisch, I think, are relegated to a sideline when in reality, you pour them in a glass and people actually like them almost immediately, especially in the modern style. So I picked those for our reds, and we'll talk about a white in a few minutes. But really what we're talking about here is, if you reference back to that wine list that I showed you a moment ago, when I wanted to get people in Petoskey, Michigan, interested in Mencia, the first thing I did was not make it a bottle-only option. I made it a glass pour option, and I made it a glass pour option that is in the middle tier of what they're comfortable spending. You know, Cabernet Sauvignon on the wine list ran up to $15 on this particular menu, a glass, which in New York sounds cheap, so keep it relative, right? And in this case, you could do tastings or full glasses, $6 and $9. So that's one option. If you can make it available by the glass, that will certainly help your efforts, because you can let people taste it before they order a whole bottle or before they try it entirely. The other would be to season matters, like Blaufränkisch and Mencia, I find to be fabulous summertime red wines where people are eating slightly lighter food, even though they say they like Cabernet all the time. When it's hot outside and you give them something with a little more refreshment, they tend to be happier as long as they've gotten what they consider to be red wine. And these wines definitely do that. And the other option is, keep it in context, pair it up with a dish that makes sense for that wine. Both of these wines have that bright, tart fruit side underneath, so they're really friendly with food, and they can go with anything from Mediterranean to specifically Italian, etc. The next is confidence. If you really think they're going to like this wine, but you don't act like you really think they're going to like this wine, then they're probably not going to order it from you. So confidence is huge. And part of confidence is being able to talk about it with pride. And in other words, say it proudly. If you can't say Mencia, then you're probably not going to sell Mencia. If you stumble over it, they're going to feel like you're uncomfortable with it. It's going to make them uncomfortable. And instead of having a bridge to the guest, there's going to be a big hole in the bridge. So if you're not sure how to pronounce it, what's the answer? Say it confidently, even if you're wrong. How many guests are you going to run into in most restaurants who speak enough languages to correct you on everything? In the Midwest, it was relatively easy. In a metropolitan area like New York, you run into languages all the time. But saying it once with confidence at least makes it sound like you're convinced it's a good idea. From there, it really starts to boil down to describing it well and describing it with friends, so to speak. So like this image with these folks who have finished their hike and they're all happy with each other's friendship and hiking and all that stuff. That's how we have to put grapes into context for people. So if we just say, well, Mencia is really great, it's red wine, you're going to love it, and we don't find out what they like and how it compares, then we have missed a part of the puzzle. So asking questions. Like, what do you normally drink at home? What's your favorite wine? Do you drink wines from all over the world, or is it just kind of one region? Those kind of things get you into a context. If somebody says, well, I drink most red wines, I really like Merlot, then you should be all set up to sell a bottle or a glass of Mencia to them, because now you have a relative grape that you already know they like, that's in a realm of style alongside of this wine. It's sort of like, I want to sell them Blaufränkisch. And they say, well, I just got back from Italy and we were in northern Italy. Awesome. Because the northern Italian grapes, if they were in northeast Italy, those are very sort of cool climate, slightly herbal, fresh styles of red grapes. If they were in Northwest Italy, then you can compare it to Barbera or Dolcetto, and at least you have a bridge that way. So keep in context that by saying things like blueberry, blackberry, strawberry, raspberry, you're talking in terms that they can connect to, that they actually can remember what those things taste like. If I say to a guest, it tastes like guava, even if that's true for a white wine, how many of my guests have actually tasted guava unless it was blended with another juice? Not so many. So keep your descriptions short and to the point in the retail and in the restaurant world. And then when you want to write a wine review and get published, you can go into all of the geek speak that we end up in writing that doesn't necessarily connect to the consumer very well. So those are great. Now, a lot of people get nervous in presenting Blaufränkisch and sometimes Mencia because there is an herbal side to these wines. And the general drinking public has been convinced that anything that's green, having green tones, in other words, is a bad idea. And that's not the case with these wines. They're not truly green when they're made well. They just have a little herb note, which most of our Italian varietals do that people love as well. How about white grapes, TJ? You want to talk about?
Yeah, I was just about to ask you. So some lesser known, I guess, Vermentino. A lot of people know it in the industry, but maybe not as well known to consumers. So can you talk about that?
Sure, absolutely. And actually, TJ and I went back and forth on this, and he's like, Vermentino's not weird. I'm like, he's not weird to you, but it certainly isn't Sauvignon Blanc or Pinot Grigio. And I think this is one of those grapes that, yeah, as you're venturing into offering different options in a wine by the glass program or in a bottle program, Vermentino is one of those not common but very safe choices. That's why I bring it up today. TJ was like, I thought you were going to talk about Assyrtiko. I'm like, well, I talk about Assyrtiko every day, so we're going to talk about Vermentino today as a change of pace for me. Vermentino is that beautiful mix of refreshing, crisp, delightful white wine, but it has the additional body in some cases that make it feel a little bit more like Albarino. It has that little bit of spritzy texture to it that makes it feel a little bit more like Gruner Veltliner. And, most serious restaurants have Gruner Veltliner by the glass now, so it's not as big a stretch as it used to be. Vermentino is the wine that, by talking about the idea that you can say, well, it has ripe lemon, towards Meyer lemon, that lemon that tastes a little bit like an orange. It has some lime. It has fresh pear. Those are very comfortable flavors to your guest. Do you like Pinot Grigio? Oh, I love Pinot Grigio. I was thinking about ordering a Pinot Grigio. Well, this is Pinot Grigio-esque. It's about the same weight, but it has, the lime instead of the peach, and it has a little bit of raw almond, and it's got this wonderful texture of spritz that like cleans off the palate. I have sold a lot of Vermentino with phrasing like that. If they say, I'm a California Chardonnay drinker, this probably isn't a wine for them. But if they drink any of the unoaked whites, Albarino, Gruner Veltliner, Pinot Grigio especially, then this wine will be for them. And it's just a matter of putting it in front of them. In food context for this wine, steamed mussels with white wine and butter, sauteed shrimp dishes, white flaky fishes, like halibut or flounder in the summertime, or any of the things that we think of as that genre of fish. It's really great with things like pasta primavera or, those really delicate white wine butter type sauces on pasta. And just absolutely wonderful as a cocktail wine with cold snacks and conversation. All of these things have a relevance with Vermentino. Of the three grapes we talked about today, this is definitely the easiest to introduce.
So, Ron, we have a few questions if you have a minute to answer.
Would love to.
So the first one from Kenneth: how do we build bridges when we don't have a som in a casual setting without a strong leading server?
That is a fabulous question, Kenneth. And it really boils down to your willingness as that person on the floor to be your own som. As much as I love the profession of sommeliers, it was my mission throughout my career to empower every one of my servers to be their own sommelier. Now, that would give me the freedom to spend a little bit more time with each table especially the ones that wanted a sommelier or the ones that really needed more attention for whatever reason. And then it gave, the rest of my team the ability to sell the majority of the list on their own. But building that bridge is the same process as you build it for the rest of your menu. And it really boils down to having a wine list that the entire staff is being taught on. They don't have to be like world-class experts on it, but they need to know what's there and how it relates to each other and how it relates to the menu. Constant, that's why we call it pre-shift, right? Every day right before shift, 2 minutes about the wine list never hurts. I would say that's one of the examples. And if you can think of things that build bridges to bring up in pre-shift, like you've heard today, bring them up, reiterate them, use examples, show a wine, put a Pinot Grigio in front of them, put a Vermentino next to it. So see, don't you think these are pretty similar? Let's go out and sell some Vermentino tonight.
All right. Our next question from Melissa. This is an interesting question. Could be potentially long. So what has been the most popular esoteric red and white that you've sold by the glass, and how did you do it?
Okay. Possibly the most esoteric. Well, it's so time dependent because I was in the restaurant industry for a long time. So at first, esoteric was not offering white Zinfandel. That's how old I am. And then I remember distinctly the first time somebody from Vendivino at the time out of Chicago brought me the first Gruner Veltliner I ever tasted. And I was like, I can't beat my head on that wall. So I also suffered from the same things that I'm talking about now. I think it also was context with location. So by the time I was a master and I was consulting and I worked with this program that I've shown you menus of, a city of 11,000 people, a town, a village of 11,000 people with an owner who wanted to make things different in a decently traveled community, but certainly they were a Midwest group to put a wine list together that had 35 wines by the glass, and always having, and it was a Mediterranean themed restaurant. So things from the US were not as common because that wasn't the theme of the restaurant. So we opened the list with Santorini by the glass. And that was definitely weird for them. It took a little bit of work and a lot of effort. But even the staff sold that wine confidently within a short period of time. The other interesting thing that I saw was in Traverse City, which was, 45, in that case, 60 miles south, a little bit bigger town, a little bit more progressed, but I helped open a restaurant there. And we put on Domaine Huet Vouvray Sec by the glass for $15 a glass, which was a good deal for that wine. And in the first month, it outsold their Chardonnay by the glass. And the answer was, and people go, what? And the answer was that the persons working the restaurant floor loved that wine and sold that wine because they loved that wine. And the guest loved it too. And it's just a matter of, Vouvray Sec at $15 a glass in Michigan is unusual. I've never been the person to sell weird for the sake of weird. I've always tried to keep it relevant to the menu and relevant to the guest experience.
So here's a question in the same sort of genre. You talked about putting Mencia by the glass.
Mm-hmm.
Do you recommend letting people try the wine before they buy it? Do they have to be able to sample a wine before they can try something new, or is building the bridges and removing the barriers enough to convince them?
That is, letting them taste it is one final offer. I always tried to build the bridge first with the other issues, comparatives, personal confidence, and context clues. And then if I sensed that they were open to it but still hesitant, my next step was I can let you taste it. Now, in the case of a wine that I was selling that wasn't by the glass, I would, if I had the time, all of this takes time, and sometimes you just don't have the time to go through all this. But if I had the time, I would say, I have a wine by the glass that's similar enough that we can have a conversation. And I would give them a little taste of something that was close, and then they could give me their feedback that way. And I could say from their feedback, I would then know, no, I'm pushing them too hard. They're not going to like this. For instance, that Mencia I had by the glass on the menu you saw, there was one right below that on the menu that you can't see that was a high-end Menthea with lots of the next step up most assuredly, and was $80 on the wine list. So by having one by the glass, it gave me an opportunity to sell the one by the bottle. Hopefully that answers the question. When I had the freedom, I would always do that because it's the easiest, but I didn't like running back and forth to the bar constantly while I was trying to sell wine. So first step was making them comfortable with conversation.
All right, I think this will probably be our last question because we're up against our time here. But this is there's two different questions, but they're kind of asking the same thing. One's from a restaurant point of view for diners, and one is actually asking, the other side of the relationship if you're a distributor selling to a buyer.
Yep.
And basically what they're asking is this new environment, post-COVID or pre-COVID or during COVID, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of people playing it safer. How would you convince a buyer to try something new? And do you think that as restaurants reopen and diners come back out, do you find that do you predict they're going to be more or less adventurous or the same as before?
I think the diners are going to be the same. The diners are always looking for someone to give them a great experience. And if nobody is there to give them a great experience, they'll default to their own choices. Hopefully that makes sense. And if it doesn't make sense, tune in on the 30th when we talk about being a tour guide. But in order to give someone a great experience, some of that is making them comfortable, showing them things that that they'll like. Like if I write a wine list that has nothing anybody's ever heard of, like I always sit down in metropolitan areas and I look down at wine lists. And if the wine list looks weird to me, and I'm as big a geek as anybody, I always ask myself, how in the world do they connect to the guest with this wine list? There's nothing here that the normal wine consumer has any idea about. So build the bridge by making sure they see something they're comfortable with. Otherwise, they're immediately like pushing back on you. As far as selling to the buyer, and you can redirect me if I still haven't answered the question at the end. Okay, TJ. Selling to the buyer to me is about that relationship you already have with the buyer, knowing that some buyers are always going to play it safe. They're really not interested in the extra effort to train their staff to be able to sell something that won't get ordered on its own. So that's rule number one, know your buyer. Some buyers can't be moved off of that. The ones who can be moved off of that are the ones looking for a way to differentiate themselves in the marketplace, to give people a reason to come see them as opposed to somebody else. And part of that is a more interesting Buy the Glass program. Part of that is a more interesting wine program in general, or beverages all along the edge, because people are more and more aware of what you're selling them. The internet is in their hand. You cannot fool them. You cannot go up to a table and tell them a story. One of them will eventually look it up in front of you. They've done it to me 10 times if they've done it once, to point out, oh yeah, I see that right here. You're right. Or, this one says 100% blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. I missed that detail. Sorry about that. So an honest attempt to add to the experience is what's needed to differentiate one on-premise account, one restaurant account from another. People do populate the predictable chain restaurant so that they know there's no risk. But if you can make them comfortable, they're happy to spend their money with a new experience. So, if I was the sales rep working out in the marketplace trying to introduce new wines to a buyer, I would be talking to them about how to differentiate themselves in the marketplace without being perceived as esoteric or weird. And that's menu mix. Did I answer the question, TJ?
I think so. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people are thinking about whether to play it safe or not. But I think the way you describe things in the process, it's not about safety. It's about you're providing the safety because you're providing the context, providing the bridges, and you're removing those barriers. So you're making it safe for them to try something new. Yeah,
you can have the world's most esoteric wine list as long as everyone on your staff can speak to every wine on that list.
Yep.
And there's actually a good example here in Richmond. There's a restaurant that focuses on Alpine cuisine and wine. So all this stuff from like Northwest Italy and the edge of Switzerland and all that stuff. And it's a pretty weird list. So I put the staff to the test and I asked just the person in front of me a question about a wine that is definitely not normal anywhere, much less in Richmond. And the server gave me the exact correct answer. And I was like, okay, moving forward, this is great. I love the fact that you stepped out on a limb where you could alienate everybody that walked in this restaurant, but you made sure that everybody talking to the table, at least that was my experience, had the answers they need to make people comfortable. So
Right.
that's always the secret, is well-informed people make other people comfortable.
Well, I think we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you so much to everyone who attended. As you can see on the slide, and as Ron mentioned, coming up in 2 weeks on June 30th at the same time, same channel, our next pre-shift topic is Be a Tour Guide, Not Grubhub. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.